All right, we are recording. Hello, CRS 426 Persuasion students. I am joined here with Bassam Shal. He is a Renaissance man, if I may say that. Just to introduce to you a little bit about Bassam, he currently works at Nielsen. He's been all around in New York City. He's been in startup spaces. He's now in corporate. And then, of course, on the side, I'd say as a pretty talented hobby, he is a stand-up comic. He often performs at the Brooklyn Underground Comedy Club. And you can find him on Instagram, and he's got some amazing YouTube video clips. And I have to say, my favorite stand-up routine that I've heard of yours so far, Bassam, is about your gay roommate. If I could say that. That's one of the few that I've been able to see. So thank you so much, Bassam, for joining our class today for this podcast recording. How you doing?
I'm great, dude. Thanks for having me. Chris, it's really great to be here. And I'm glad you enjoyed the clip. Yeah, I think that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. Definitely pre-pandemic. That was pre-pandemic. That clip was great because it can touch on two different types of themes where this month obviously is Pride. So I could put that clip out right now, but then even the month before was Ramadan, which is what I did the comparison with. And, when I put that on TikTok, and I got a lot of gay and Muslim fans, and then some gay Muslim fans. So overall, pretty niche demographic, but nonetheless very passionate.
That's awesome. I gotta start doing a search for gay Muslim comedy fans of yours. I think that's a pretty good niche market to tap into.
Yeah, definitely. Not in Florida, but in New York, yeah.
Definitely in New York. I'd say New York City especially.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bassam. So I have to ask you, how did you get up the nerve to do stand-up? How did you get into stand-up comedy?
It's a great question. So I was living in DC right after I graduated from Syracuse, Maxwell Mafia, 2015.
That's right.
I was working in a lot of public policy, international affairs types of roles, a lot of PR, lobbyist shops, and overall wasn't exactly happy with the work that I was doing. Back in high school and college, I did some sketch, and I was always really interested in stand-up. Dave Chappelle was one of my favorite comedians. Jon Stewart was a huge influence on me growing up. So when I got to DC, my roommate, he took me to a comedy show, and I loved it. But then at the end of the show, I'm like, oh, I could do this. And as arrogant as that sounds, it's a very humbling experience when you jump into stand-up comedy, especially the DC comedy scene, which is a really, really good scene. It has produced a lot of great comedians like Chappelle, like Wanda Sykes,
really?
Nameless other. Yeah.
I didn't know Wanda Sykes was DC. Oh, that's awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A lot of talent comes out of DC. Walking into that scene wasn't necessarily easy. It is putting yourself out there, and a lot of times you have to sort of bring your friends and family to your first couple performances so you can get on stage. Sometimes you have to be passing out flyers outside or work the door just so you can get some stage time, because stage time in the comedy world is basically its own currency. So people are talking about Ethereum and Bitcoin, and I'm talking about five minutes in a basement that is probably not fire safety compliantable. So I think I got into it initially in DC. And it was maybe happening, I would think maybe once or twice a month. And then I just sort of fell in love with it, and it kind of became something I was doing, I think, consistently every single night. And then I moved to New York 2017. So I've been in New York for about 4 years now. So been doing comedy for about 4 to 5 years now.
Wow. I have to ask, was the transition from DC to New York tough, or did DC kind of give you that thick skin to bust into the New York market?
That's a good question too. Yeah, DC was definitely good for developing thick skin. It's tough to break into New York because there's so many other people doing it. In DC, if you're doing comedy, you will know who's doing comedy there within, I think, maybe 7 to 8 months. And then in all the time I've done comedy in New York, 4 or 5 years now, there's still comedians I haven't met, and stages I haven't performed at. So it's just kind of whole big pond, that small fish metaphor. But if I had started comedy in New York, I don't know if I would have kept with it because it is really
Interesting.
difficult here. So open mics is where, you start sort of at least like getting into the comedy world, and then you hopefully get booked on actual like, paid or like, professional shows. And in DC, the open mic scene there was great because there were actual audience members there, people who actually wanted to see, comedians try out new stuff, or like amateur comedians, or like,
Nice.
people who were like, oh, I'm brave enough to go perform at an open mic, so let me bring my friends and all of that. And in New York, the open mic scene is the complete opposite, where it's just comedians and everyone hates you
Interesting.
and everyone doesn't want to hear your set, and you have maybe 2 minutes. And a lot of times you have to pay just to get on the open mic.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so you have to pay to get on stage when no one likes you there, and you don't get a drink ticket afterwards. Overall, it's a pretty miserable experience. If I had started a comedy in New York, I don't know if I really would have kept with it. When I moved to New York, it was pretty miserable, and I was working a good like job, obviously at the time, but then the nights were very much trying to break into the scene.
Yeah.
And I remember going on vacation to Colorado, to Denver, and I was thinking of quitting, and I was just having a drink with my friend at the bar, and then randomly the bartender was like, oh, you're a comedian. He overheard our conversation, and he's like, all right, like, I'm actually a comedian. I'm like, okay, this fucking guy. And he just plugs his book first, and then he plugs his book, which he wrote about stand-up, and then the second thing he said was, you should go to the Denver Comedy Works because it's new talent mic, and they like like out of towners, and I think you could definitely get on stage. So I went to the Denver Comedy Works Comedy Club. I kind of like listed off like the clubs that I was performing at in New York. They gave me about 7 minutes. It went extremely well. The set really, really went well. That was like the first time I had been on stage in front of like actual people in a couple of months, and the jokes itself are shitty. I look back at that set, I'm like, man, I was such a bad comedian. But the response was good enough where I was like, all right, I have to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And in New York, what I started doing was this thing called barking, which is when you're like on the streets in front of the comedy club, and you're basically saying to people like, hey, guys, I got a free comedy show, $5 margaritas, $3 Coronas. You highlight the drink specials, half off wine on Sundays, and you get people into the club, and then you get to perform. So I was pretty good at doing that. I was pretty good at being a street beggar, like Aladdin on Agrabah. So so substitute Agrabah for Greenwich Village, and then you can just have me right there. Yeah.
Well, I have to admit, I could feel like somewhat an asshole because I've had that experience where, comics are standing outside the club and they're like, oh, come on in, come on in. And so if I ever was a jerk to you, I apologize. But
No.
I'll know for next time.
No, trust, there's too much comedy in that area specifically. So there's literally, I think, like catcallers and comedians who are just trying to, earn an honest living. So you kind of have to, pick your poison on which one you want to be. But there were some cool things that came out of it actually. Once, like the lead singer of the Killers walked by, and
Wow.
I was barking at him, and he was going to the Comedy Cellar, which is like, the like top like club in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm like down the street, so why would he come see me? But he saw me after the Comedy Cellar show, and I asked to get a selfie with him. We started talking a little bit about the Killers and the music. I'm a big fan, so he just gives me free VIP tickets to the Killers.
What?
And so now I'm going to Terminal 5 the next day, and I get to like the front of the line. Terminal 5 is like big venue in New York, and it's a corporate like TBS Turner Broadcast Network after party, and I get to the front of the line, and the usher goes, oh, Bassam Shaw. Oh yeah, you're with the band. Go ahead. And it was just like a crazy night. Open bar, open food. So that's the kind of shit that happened in New York. So as much as like barking day to day sucks, like I got one of the coolest nights of my life out of that. So
See, students, start barking, and you can meet Brandon Flowers from the Killers and get VIP in a nice lounge. Like, I think that's worth it, Bassam.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience with hecklers. If, I know it's hard enough just to get your audience to actually listen to you, but you've already explained awesome ways that you have to physically persuade people and grab them, off the street. How do you deal with the backlash? I know some of your comedy, obviously, you go into realms that are, intercultural, could be a bit sensitive. What happens when you get that asshole in the audience that just is just a jerk to you just to be a jerk? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so the West Village, like the Greenwich Village area is great because it's kind of like packed with all different types of people from like all walks of life. There's a lot of NYU students, a lot of tourists, genuine, just like New Yorkers. And to sort of get these people all together in one room and to sort of like have them kind of come together and laugh, like that's kind of a difficult feat because everyone obviously has different tastes, different senses of humor. Um, there's always been like a couple hecklers who will sort of feel like they want to be on the right side of something. Um, and it's so interesting when this topic is brought up to me because I've had a couple hecklers, but I've always been able to sort of shut them down in like the West Village area with like just like kind of like riffing off of them or like kind of insulting them a little bit. But then
Nice.
the worst heckle that I think I've ever gotten, this is kind of funny. It was at a Muslim show, a Muslim Writers Collective show. And the woman who had heckled me was this woman in a headscarf, a hijabi. And the joke that I was making was like, I'm not a good Muslim because like it's a very numeric religion and I'm just bad with numbers. And that's just how the premise started. And then she just stood up in the crowd and goes like, you're being very offensive right now. It's a very spiritual religion. It's not numeric. And I was just saying like, look, like we pray 5 times a day. There's 72 virgins. Like, you know, there's a lot of different like random numbers involved with this. Like we invented algebra, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to like be funny about it. I'm not trying to like say a TED Talk speech here or like, you know, like kind of provide you with this like amazing, you know, like Farrakhan level of speaking. And half of the crowd, I think, wanted me to get off stage. Half the crowd wanted me to stay. And
Wow.
I remember I finished the set, but I remember walking away. I was just like, wow, like, does my own community hate me? And then a lot of people came up to me afterwards, like, hey, man, you're great. They're just like very sensitive over here. But in terms of like heckling experiences, like that was probably the one that has kind of kept me up at night when that happened. But otherwise, it's been mostly okay. I think in the pandemic, though, people are now more likely to kind of be a little more chatty and rambunctious when you get on stage because everyone's been cooped up. Like we've seen what happens so like with the NBA playoffs, like, you know,
Oh yeah.
audience members getting kind of crazy and like throwing stuff at the performers. And I've definitely seen some crazy heckles before, but fortunately I haven't been on the wrong side of those yet. So
I have to say, I didn't even mention this. I'm sort of finishing up Judy Gold's book it's basically about stand-up comedy, freedom of speech, how we can say that, right? Comedy is a different context. It's a different communication framework than a sermon that, you know, a priest would be given or something like that. And I really, really wish now I would have been able to get you for a lot longer for a more fun conversation just based on freedom of speech in stand-up comedy. But
endless topic.
So good.
Like, I think, for example, like just kind of at least touch on that theme. Like I went to Austin, Texas, like 3 months ago. And there are certain jokes that I saw that happen in Austin, Texas, where you can't do those in New York. You can't do them in Brooklyn.
Really?
You can't. And there's even jokes that I do now where I perform a lot in Manhattan, but I also perform a lot in Brooklyn. But there's definitely things that I won't necessarily try to like delve into on a Brooklyn crowd as compared to like a West Village crowd. But the important thing that I think I've learned in comedy, especially now, is that you have to kind of take risks. That's ultimately what you want, because that's a genuine laugh when you're sort of acknowledging something that's like an elephant in the room or on the tip of people's tongues, but they can't say it. And Trump was horrible for stand-up comedy. I think Trump was horrible for comedy in general because everyone now was so like aware of this sort of like, you know, toxic, problematic kind of like culture that he was sort of like, you know, obviously fostering, and no one wanted to sort of be lumped in with what was going on with that sort of like narrative and that sort of like, you know, type of speech. But now with Biden in office now, like I think comedy becomes a lot less sort of scrutinized. The bar is a lot less like, you know, high for comedians because like at the end of the day, like we're just trying to make people laugh. We're not trying to sort of like change minds, but we're on the side of funny, not the side of necessarily right or wrong. And maybe that sounds incredibly cliche. Like my fiance is like right behind me. She's like, God, you guys are just so pretentious. But in general, like I think when I started comedy in DC, like I was always trying to like make like a really big, broad, like political point. And now it's more of like, I need to make someone think about something a little bit differently, but like have it be like a little bit more mischievous.
Love that. Yeah, no, that I think that speaks very loudly to the concept of the course that these students are in right now is persuasion, and understanding that context matters, and that history matters, and the fact that, you know, Biden is president now, hopefully that can change the tone of the discourse, so we can let our hair down, not that I have hair, and have a little bit more fun, you know, kind of poking fun at ourselves. And what reminded me too of Judy Gold's book was that she's constantly poking fun at Judaism because she's Jewish, and that often she gets heckled by Jewish, you know, folks who are in her audience. So I think that's super interesting.
She's doing something right. That's basically it. Yeah. When you can like get I think like getting a reaction from the crowd is something that is always fun. Obviously, laugh is like the most important thing that you want to go after. But I think also just like when we're talking about persuasion too, it's like there's certain things that you don't want to say just for shock value, but I think you want to say certain things to just be like, oh, no one has sort of like looked at it from this point of view. So like, let's just like explore this point of view in a humorous way, but it's not taken too seriously, because at the end of the day, like I'm not actually believing this. Like I think the best comedians are people who will leave you wondering, oh, what do they actually think on that topic? As opposed to like, oh, he clearly hates Trump. Trump is an asshole. And I'm going to go for this easy sort of clapsure sort of things. But like now it's more of like, say something that you think people want to hear, but don't necessarily like understand why they want to hear it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that harkens back to your role models. I mean, Jon Stewart, Chappelle. I mean, Chappelle, you know, when Trump won the election in 2016, we all needed Dave Chappelle on SNL that night, because I think he was able to kind of put things in sort of different formats for us and understand like, look, yes, this may not be a good 4 years for us, but we still got to have fun. We still got to poke fun at ourselves as well. So.
Yeah. And like, that's an example of like Chappelle is someone who growing up, I think he was my favorite comedian. Nowadays, he's become someone who I think has like kind of evolved past just traditional stand-up comedy. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that he says is not necessarily going to be on the right side of history. And, you know, criticism for that can be warranted. If you don't like his comedy, you don't need to turn on his Netflix special. But it's amazing to see like how some people will take their energy and be like, all right, Chappelle needs to be canceled. Chappelle, we can't don't sort of like, you know, buy his tickets, don't, you know, sell any of his merch, blah, blah, blah. But there's obviously a lot of other worse shit going on in the world.
Oh yeah.
But just visibly, you know, people will see this and like, this is something that I can change, or I think I can change, but it's not as easy as people like to believe it is.
So true. Wow. I have one last question for you, Bassam. I promised you I'd keep you at 20 minutes. And
no, not at all. I mean,
you know, being in a hospital.
What am I doing at Nielsen on a Friday? You know?
What am I doing at SU on a Friday? Clearly, I'm not on campus right now, but I'm still.
They never had classes on Friday. That was one of my favorite parts about Syracuse is that like even the professors were like, "Look, we're taking the Shabbos, right? Like that's what we're doing, all right? We don't need any of that."
I think all the students can empathize with you right now on that. Yep. I do have one last question, and this is a selfish question because this, you know, this little podcast recording is for my students. And so, you know, I assume there are some, you know, folks in the class who've always wanted to make that leap into stand-up, right? Maybe they lack the confidence, maybe they lack the support structure. Maybe their parents are saying, no, you can't do comedy because it's, you know, whatever. What's your advice for students in the class right now who may have an interest in comedy or how to pursue comedy?
Let's see. It's difficult because there's no big blueprint. I feel like I went to Maxwell. I studied international relations. I wanted to, I think out of high school, initially do like VPA or like communications or rhetorical studies, but you know, I'm not Newhouse fancy, so I couldn't muster the grades for that. My parents, I think they've always known that I kind of have like the stage bug, and I'm kind of a performer at heart. And I think like for people who are interested in getting into it, the most important thing to know that is that it's if you want to do it, you should do it, but you have to understand that it's not like fun. It really is like a lot of work. If you're willing to put in the work, it can be really incredibly rewarding. It's very humbling. It's taxing, it's tiring, it's financially pretty crazy. You get separated a lot from like your friends and your family, like just because like your weekends and even like the weekdays, like at night that you're working, obviously, to kind of pull this off. So if you are like fully committed and invested in doing it, like I suggest like, you can definitely go out for it, but like know that it's really hard to do it just solely as like a hobby. And like, as much as obviously I work like, these corporate jobs and obviously during the day, like stand-up has always been like the big sort of dream for me. I've been doing it for like 4 or 5 years now, and you're never gonna not think that it's not possible to make it, because you're just basically programmed into believing that like the stakes are high, but like you're never gonna cut it unless you get some certain thing. And then when you get that certain thing, you realize that you have to keep going. It doesn't get easier. Like a month ago, I got passed at this comedy club called the Stand Comedy Club, which is I think probably like the second best or like one of the best clubs in the city. And I wasn't expecting this to happen so quickly after the pandemic. So it was a great surprise to me, and it was also just a good indication of like what I've been doing like my career. But as soon as I got that, I realized that like, okay, like this is a good accomplishment. Like Chappelle performs here, like really like famous people perform here. But now like I have to put in even more work because I'm getting stage time, I'm getting paid now, and I'm gonna be performing with some of the funniest people on the planet. So like now I have to write even more. I have to just like bring my A game every single night. And it's definitely something that you really have to be passionate about. So like if you're not really feeling it, you can't really half-ass this, because everyone who is doing this is relentless. Like this city, New York, especially, it's a grind. It's insanely competitive. Where if I was at a wedding in Orlando this weekend, and it was one of my closest friends in DC getting married, and obviously the ceremony was great. I had a good time hanging out with my friends, but by I think the second or third day, I was restless for New York, for comedy. I had huge FOMO. All my friends are performing on like, great stages. They're getting amazing opportunities. And I wasn't there. So I'm just thinking.
You were in Orlando.
I was in Orlando. Yeah,
Which is where I am actually right now, but that's.
Harry Potter world and, Jurassic Park were a lot of fun, but just like 5 minutes on stage, like it's randomly like kind of just what I like to do. It's cathartic for me. I think when you get off stage and you do well, like that's like a drug. It's like really like a drug. You kind of have to keep on going with it. So anybody who's trying to get into it, you have to understand that like you have to really be like doing this almost every single night. You have to be like obsessed with it. And if you want to do it, go for it. My best advice is to go to an open mic, 1, and 2, start a show, start your own show, bring out people, and then bring other comedians there so they can see you perform. And then you also just want to start performing in front of regular people as opposed to,
your
other
friends.
comedians. Yeah, your friends. And exactly. Yeah. I mean, I love performing in front of strangers because it's just so much easier to like not be in your head on like thinking like, oh, I have to like impress or do well in order for my family not to think that I'm fucking crazy for doing this. And my parents have never seen me perform live. They've seen a couple of the clips. They've seen a couple of the clips that you're referencing, and they've not been happy. So I'm glad that you've found good solace in the stand-up that I've been doing, Chris. But for
of course, I mean,
Dr. and Mrs. Shaw, they're a little skeptical still.
Well, that's all right. I'll give you a great letter of recommendation. I'll give you a LinkedIn recommendation. I'm sure Dr. Shaw, both doctors, will be very impressed with an adjunct professor's recommendation on LinkedIn for you. Bassam, you are a rock star. I know you don't need me to tell you that. I hope one day that we can bring our students down to New York City to actually see you in person live, which would be amazing. I'll have to try to put in some funding for that. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, Nielsen on a Friday, SU on a Friday here. And thanks so much for that. And I owe you an Amazon gift card it's coming to your, I didn't think you would, after I realized you were Muslim, I was like, oh, maybe he
Oh,
doesn't
dude, no,
drink
I'm drinking wine. Don't worry.
wine. Oh,
I
good.
drink, I smoke. What are you talking? Have you not seen my stand up? Have you seen what I talk about? I think
That's
like it's
right.
pretty clear. Yeah, yeah.
You being pulled over in Syracuse and being caught smoking
Yes.
pot, which I think is actually another great comedy routine. He thought you were Italian.
And that is actually based on a true story. I was driving back to Albany and I was wearing a Beatles shirt, and like I had like checkered shoes, and then they're like, "Man, you look like you're like an '80s kid." And then we just start talking about like Ferris Bueller and Pretty in Pink, and I'm like, "Officer, am I free to go, or do we need to talk more about John Hughes?" Like this is a really weird conundrum that I'm in. But yeah, I mean, I love wine. Don't get me wrong, but definitely I love Jeff Bezos more, so I want to get him.
Oh yeah, that'll be coming in your email, Bassam. Don't you worry. See, students, sometimes you have to, it's not a bribe, it's being thankful and grateful. So always make sure you give back to your community.
Yeah.
All right, Bassam, listen, you have a happy Friday. I really appreciate you doing this podcast recording for me. The students are going to see this. So don't worry, this isn't going on YouTube or anything like that if you want sponsors. But you have a great day. Thanks again for helping me out. And I will be in touch soon.
Of course, thank you so much, Chris. This is a great time, and always had a great time, coming back to Syracuse and talking with your students. So, really appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, I hope I'll be performing at the university maybe next semester because my fraternity is always trying to set up shows for me up there. So
please let me know. I will advertise for you as much as students will listen to me.
On LinkedIn, tag me on LinkedIn. That's all I do.
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again, Bassam. I'll be in touch and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Chris. You too.
Take care.